Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'd like to step through my 15 tips that I've kind of put together of how to become a self-taught software developer. And if this is the first time you've seen any of my videos, I'm Dustin. I'm a self-taught software developer, working as a senior software engineer right now in Vancouver, Canada. And the tips that I've learned that I'm going to share with you guys, they're throughout my career, over a decade. So I do have some experience and learned quite a bit along the way. And I know when I was just starting out, not even as a developer, just out of high school, I would have appreciated this kind of information. So, and I think had I got it, I probably would have been a software developer quite a bit sooner. So, yeah. Well, with that done, I'd like to get right into it. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. I made some slides here, so let's check them out. So the first, I don't know if I guess it's a tip, but it's a question to everybody to point you in the right direction is, what's your goal? What's the goal? What kind of developer do you want to be? Why do you want to be a developer? I think a lot of people probably watching this want to do it to make money, for a job, but I know when I started as a kid, I just wanted to have fun with it. And I think that attitude can definitely pay off as far as making it fun, a fun process to learn. And if you can keep that, and if you can keep that energy of like, I just want to have fun with code, but still manage to kind of steer yourself in a professional direction, I think that can be a great combo. But you need to know what you want to be. And going here, I have a page here from Stack Overflow. It's like a very popular developers information site, a lot of different stuff on there. This is their 2020 survey where they kind of talk about different developer roles. And if you scroll down to all the developer roles there are, I mean, there's quite a few. It's very focused right now on web development, I think. I guess backend's not necessarily web development, but that's where a lot of things are going right now. So you're going to see backend developer, full stack, front end. Those are typically web development type of things. Desktop, enterprise applications, mobile development, DevOps, designer, do you want to make a game, etc. So many here. So you have to think about that first, because that's going to steer all your learning, and pretty much everything you do is going to be based on that. You need to figure out what you want to do there. So yeah, ask yourself that. Get started there. Do I want to do web development? Okay, maybe I want to be full stack, maybe I want to be front end, maybe I want to be back end. At the same time, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into those things as well. It's better to say your platform, do you want to be doing websites? You want to do things on the phone? And then kind of research through Google, what are the best technologies to use in those situations? And that kind of brings me to my next point, actually, which is learn how to search for things. That is your developer tool. That's the best one you're going to have forever, I would say. So anytime you're going to ask me a question, oh, Dustin, you didn't cover this. What about this? Google it, Learning how to, first thing you got to do is Google how to Google. I actually have a little link here, just like there's even a website called Let Me Google That for you. But here's basically a Google you could do, how to use Google search like a software developer. And if you look at the results here, I'll go through a quick little example of searching as a software developer. So first thing, the one at the top here, that can be a good recommendation. Sometimes it can be an ad. These can be nice little tidbits, but sometimes the information they get is wrong. I like to look at where the URLs are from to see, okay, Spiceworks, that's like a forum or a how-to article. A Medium thing, here's like a blog. A Quora, that's like different people asking questions. Here's a Stack Exchange, same people that are doing Stack Overflow. Here's a research document, how developers search for code. That's probably more specific. I mean, that's it. Google made this, but that's not quite what we're talking about. But you can see how you can use Google to learn how to use Google better, and then kind of it's a force multiplier at that point. So that's something you need to know. And if you see here all the different ones I've taken photos of here. So there's Google. You got MDN. This is the Mozilla Developer Network. This is a very good documentation for JavaScript if you're going to go with a front end direction, or even back end nowadays. I mean, we'll get into that in a bit when we're talking about picking languages. But there's different websites depending on which language you pick that are going to be good. Let's say you do PHP. The PHP documentation is very good. Python. all of them. Something I'm kind of pointing at here, and if you see here, I got the React docs, is that you should trust the documentation from the people that are making the things. Rather than going to a tutorial and someone saying, hey, here's how I got it working, go into the documentation and they'll typically explain how to get it working. And if they don't, they'll kind of give you all the tools to do it yourself. And that's kind of part of the fun of being a self-taught programmer, is not doing the tutorials or the boot camps or any of that stuff, and just being like, okay, well, how could you figure it out? You know, if I was just working at that company and I didn't have the tools, you know, or like all I had is a manual, could I do it with just their manual? And you would hope you could. That's the whole point of the documentation. So you should trust the documentation in that way. What other one I got here? Yeah, GitHub issues. That's another good one. That's good for like once you start looking for, if you have problems or anything like that, places to look. Stack Overflow being one of them. Like I said, GitHub issues. W3 Schools is actually not so bad. I don't know how official they are in any capacity compared to some of these other ones, but they have some pretty good information. So that's definitely another one to consider. And there's 100 more, and it depends on your language. And I should note that some of these suggestions are going to be more JavaScript focused and more front end full stack focused. But if you decided to do something like a Python or PHP or wherever you go, again, you just Google tools for PHP and you're going to find 100 million things. So, and yeah, another thing to note on that is you want to check many sources. So as you see, when I was kind of scrolling down in my Googlings here, that I was looking at a bunch of them, and I typically would open almost all of these and then just quickly browse them. Maybe to look through all of these links would take, let's say, 3 minutes, you know, for let's say 10 links, because I'm not going to be reading the whole thing. I'm going to be skimming. I'm going to find the information I need, looking at the key points and that kind of thing. And that's something that's good to get used to and learn. And I'll sometimes go to the first or second page and just open all of them and just go through 20 tabs, just boom, boom, boom. And by the end, you've kind of got a quorum of what people have been trying, you know, typically, not always. But that's where you got to play with it. And you just got to keep searching stuff. So yeah, on to the next point. Start with an easy to learn language. That's going to be pretty important, I would say. And the one I'm going to be recommending to you is the JavaScript, CSS, HTML grouping, I would almost call them, and that you're typically going to be doing those three together. But there's also Python, there's PHP, there's a couple out there, definitely, that I would say are beginner languages where you can really jump in quick and just start playing with it. But JavaScript has a lot of advantages in that it's got a lot of support behind it now and a lot of tooling to do. You can use it in the back end, you can use it in the front end. It's a huge part of a full stack developer to be able to really deeply understand JavaScript and HTML and CSS as well. And those have been growing and changing all the time. And there's so many tools around those. So you're going to want to know that. And some things I have for if you want to be able to play around with the code. This is a cool one here for front end stuff, CodePen, where you can just kind of get right into coding. And you say start, and you see you got HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can just start typing HTML just like so, and you're going to get that. And then you can start styling it. Let's say you want the text to be red, let's say. And there you go, now it's red. So right away you're playing with it. And another advantage too with JavaScript is, and we'll get more into some of the tooling here, but if you just open up the developer tools here right in Chrome, this essentially allows you to type JavaScript right here. So you type hello and it gives you back hello. That's not the best example, but you could say x equals hello. Not the best declaration, but then when I call X here, you see it's hello. So you're already programming essentially just by typing the JavaScript in here, and you can go pretty far with that. And the same thing with the Elements tab here for the HTML, and the side here, my camera's kind of cutting off here. Let me just make this bigger and I can show you. This styles part here is essentially the CSS. So between those three components, you could play with any web pages, HTML, their CSS, and what kind of JavaScript they got going on, if you understand how to dig into the sources here as well. And that's something important to understand with the tools that you have. And back in the day when I was starting, I would just be kind of downloading the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript files and looking through them on Notepad. But nowadays it's quite a bit more advanced and you don't have to do that kind of thing. So let's just keep looking here then. What's another one? So that's more for front end here, but there's also something like these repels. They have a lot of these different ones, and you can see some examples here. Let's go to the bottom here, and they have all the different languages. So let's say you want to try out Node.js. You just click that here, and there you go. There's a Node.js hello world, and you say run to that, and there you go. And you can change the program to be whatever you want here. You could say 1 + 1, let's say, and then hopefully you get a 2. There we go. So you're running Node.js, and you're kind of learning Node.js right there. And you could switch to Python, and you get their hello world. So this is a quick way to just jump in and play with it, just to try to get an understanding. And as you play with it, if you decide you want to do a certain thing, that's when you can just jump to Google. I mean, there's no docs here, or you could jump to the docs. So if you're doing Python, you just type in Python documentation, and there you go. And then you're going to have some Python documentation, and I haven't personally looked at the Python documentation, but it's something to trust typically, that they have a lot of best practices here and how to properly do things typically. So yeah, you're going to want to be careful in what language you pick. And I would say once you do pick a language, one really important thing is that you stick with it. And like I was saying about, if you go with JavaScript, is to learn it deeply, to learn about all the ES6, ES7, all the different features that they have going on, all the different frameworks, the tooling around it. Same with CSS and HTML and the different frameworks like React and Angular. That would be going deep in that direction, and not being like, let's say you learn a little bit and you made a to-do app or something like that, and then you want to make a to-do app in Python, let's say. It can be interesting to do that, but at the same time, you become a bit scattered, and you don't really have that deep understanding of the language that when you focus on it for a while. And that's why I think you would want to stay focused at the start. And that's how I did it for quite a while, is I would stick with one language and really get a few projects that I wanted to do. And at that time, and after that, if I was to switch to another language, something fun that I would like to do is try to write a program I already made in that new language, to also get an understanding of how programming languages are quite similar sometimes. And it's just kind of figuring out the different syntaxes and the different libraries between them, and what they can do, where they run, that kind of thing. And as far as not jumping out and ditching on a language, also feel free to just jump in and dive in and start messing with the code and causing errors and writing the wrong thing and just Googling all the way. And that's just part of it. And you're going to be breaking things, and things aren't going to work, and you're going to bang your head against the keyboard a lot. But you just got to, if you persevere and you have that passion and you have an interest for programming, rather than being like, oh, I need to learn this or I'm not going to get a job and I'm not going to make money, then you've got the right attitude to learn. If you're not focused on the money and that kind of thing. So the next one here is understand the fundamentals. So there are some fundamentals. There's things where you're just going to have to learn them. I think the best way now, growing up, I kind of just played around with computers constantly and would look things up on Google, AltaVista, whatever the search engine of the time was. But I would say nowadays that there's so many good books out there that you should definitely look at some books. I posted some of the ones here that I own, Code Complete, Pragmatic Programmer, Don't Make Me Think. These are some really interesting books. It's Code Complete and Pragmatic Programmer talk about similar things, but they kind of get into a lot of the things that are listed around here about just the basics of programming, variables, conditions, functions. What else do we have here? Arrays, loops, that kind of thing. Those are pretty fundamental, and some core concepts around what you're doing, why you're doing it with code, and just kind of having an interesting understanding for it. The Don't Make Me Think one is kind of more about UX and UI, but it's good to have a good understanding about that. And when I first got into even my professional career as a programmer, I didn't really have a good understanding of UX and UI, and I had to learn it as I go, and kind of for a while it was just kind of what felt right to me. But there is kind of a lot of methodology and thought that's already gone behind it, and that's where you can get a lot of this condensed in books that you're not going to easily get from Google, because you're going to get these just small articles from Google, or there's also something tactile about books. Maybe I'm old generation for that, but when I have a book in front of me, I'm more generous to jump around and to kind of make little notes of things, where when I'm just sitting on a computer Googling, I'll end up at Wikipedia looking at planets at some point or something like that. I deviate from the task at hand typically. So yeah, you're definitely going to understand the fundamentals. And one thing, some things I wanted to clarify about. So one thing, a nice way that I like to think about programming is you're trying to explain things to the computer. And that's essentially what the different languages are. They're languages to talk to the computer in the same way that English is a language that I'm talking to you guys. The programming languages are ways to talk to the computer in a very logical manner. And that's one thing I really enjoy about talking to computers is it's like, and writing things and telling computers what to do. It's very logical, and you can be very clear. And if something doesn't work, you almost always know that it's some error in your logic or the way that you've written things. But yeah, definitely getting good at logic and getting good at understanding this happened and this happened, and just the order of things is good as well. But definitely, yeah, logic in general. What's some other things I noted here that I've written here, like DNS, FTP, HTTP, HTTPS. That's a lot of internet protocol type stuff. But I mean, it's acronym soup a little bit, but those are some basic things that you guys are going to want to know. Like DNS is going to be necessary if you're going to be setting up a domain or something like that. FTP, if you're going to, that depends how you're managing your website, but that's a way to kind of manage files in remote locations. HTTP, HTTPS, those are just different protocols for communicating with the browser essentially, and that goes hand in hand with the SSL stuff. But you're definitely going to want to learn that, and I'm not going to get into it in this episode or in this video, but it's important. And REST APIs is another one. I don't know if I think that's cut off on this picture here, or I don't know if I wrote it down. But REST APIs for sure. That's something super important. It's going to be necessary because it's the method of communicating between the front end and the back end, and between different services. API being application programming interface, and REST being just a kind of a standard for a way to do it. Representational state transfer, I think it is. I'm not sure. It's, like I say, it's acronym soup a little bit, but these are the core concepts that you're really going to want to know. And you could, again, Google understanding fundamentals about programming, Google core concepts about programming, core concepts about internet, about websites, just the most basic things, the same questions you would have if you're going to write a comment. Just start talking to Google. And a lot of times that can get you where you need to go, but it can be a bit frustrating sometimes. And we'll get in later to doing comments and to having a community around it, someone to talk to other than Google. Yeah. What other things? So yeah, I mentioned the books, algorithms and data structures. That's something I'm not going to talk about too much. It's not a huge thing that I got into for a very long time. Obviously, it's pretty hot right now. It's big if you want to get into the big companies, the FANGs, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Googles and such, Apple. They're important for sure, but I would say learn them when you need them, because when do you need them, honestly? A lot of times you don't. With data structures, you are going to need them for sure, but a lot of times you can intuit the best way. Like just search data structures and get an idea for what they're talking about. But at the same time, there's a long time where I didn't know what those things were, and I was using them all the time, if you know what I mean. So sometimes, I mean, these are necessities, these things, to write an algorithm, to write a data structure. You're going to do them even if you don't understand what you're doing. And to study these is to understand the different ones and the different ways to do it and ideal ways to do it. But getting to these algorithms your own way can be very useful. And it's something that I'd like to talk to about at the end for interviews, where they're going to talk to you about algorithm questions possibly, and where not knowing is okay if you know how to get there, and sometimes, and you might not get there. And there's interviews that I've done where I didn't get there, but I was confident that I knew how to work through it, and I knew that it was a limited amount of time with the interview. So I knew, hey, maybe we won't figure it out in 30 minutes. In the same way that at my job, if I have a task, it's like you break it up over the week. Perhaps you have sprints. It's not just on the spot. Okay, figure out the algorithm right now. Commit the code. It's a thinking process, and especially when you don't have Google, which is essentially your best tool, like I was saying, it can be tricky. So that's another reason why I don't want people to focus on that, and because it can just be a downer, honestly, to try to memorize these different algorithms and think about them when you don't need them yet. And that's when we'll talk about the next tip, actually, is where you might need them and where you should start from. And that is finding practical projects. This is the order that these are in. I've thought them out a little bit. So, because that's what the reason I'm saying that is you want to get into projects quick. And the thing with projects is, like, tutorials tell you how to make projects, I guess. Sure, you could call those projects. But what I'm talking about with a project is an idea that you have typically, or something you find or something you want to do, and you don't want someone to tell you exactly how to do it their way. And that's where I would suggest, if you want to get some ideas, there's definitely places to get ideas. I posted one here, App Ideas. That's a GitHub. If you type App Ideas GitHub, you'll find it. And it's got hundreds of different ideas. Another one there, the Git Stars repositories. These are top repositories. This is kind of if you want to just mess around with code and you want to do something practical and interesting that's going to be nice on your resume. Is you could contribute to open source. I would suggest that's definitely a good one. And if you have a cool a library that you're interested in, a feature you want to add or think would be cool, or something you ran into that was inadequate, you can try to fill that gap and make it a learning process. And you're going to have people to help you in a community, because the people that are maintaining that project care about whatever you're about to do, because it's a contribution to them. But back to a project for yourself, go to a tutorial and get the title and start from there. If it says how to make this app, just okay, that's a good idea. I'm just going to try to do it. And if you get stuck, you could peek at the tutorial and see what they did at this point and that point, and you can use it for reference. But be honest with yourself and just try to make it yourself. I mean, you're not cheating to look at the tutorial, but you need to be learning and understanding what you're doing. And it's not necessarily the best way to be kind of fumbling around in the dark and just kind of playing around, but that way works a lot of times to get to the goal, and then you can kind of go back from there and figure out what you have learned from that process and how you'll do it better next time. So it's not like you're always fumbling around. The fumbling process it's an interesting way to learn, and it's a way that I've really always liked. Another idea you could do is portfolio sites. Again, just talking about practical projects. Having a portfolio site is practical because if you want to get a job, then that's something you can show right away. And also it's a portfolio. Yeah, it's just a great site for examples. Like the portfolio site itself is an example, and anything you put on it can be an example if you'd like, because it's the perfect context for that. But it's also a perfect opportunity to not do a portfolio site and to do something cool and outrageous. I mean, something I'll mention, I guess, that my Saturday streams, my making an operating system in React, an operating system. It's a project I've already done, and now I'm redoing it with streams. But that was another crazy project. There's no tutorials on how to do that I know of. I mean, maybe you could pick a few pieces together, but I never even thought, hey, I'm going to look for tutorials on that. No, I just thought right from the start, like, I need a square, how do I make a square? I need it to be colored. How do I color it? I mean, I made this project recently, so I already knew those things, but that's how basic it is. I mean, I started make a square, color it, it starts there, and it's a snowball effect, but you have to trust in that process of just jumping in sometimes. A good idea you can give to yourself in this quote here that I haven't mentioned yet is I want to learn how to program so I can make what? I'm going to assume that some of the people watching this have some kind of quote like that or thought in their head. Whatever that thing is that you want to learn how to program to do, just do that at the start, I would suggest. I mean, that's a crazy one, but I like that idea, to be honest. Start with that, and then you don't have to completely just stick with that until it's perfect. You can move on to something else perhaps if you need to, but while you're focusing on that, it's an important project because it's going to give you so many opportunities to Google things, essentially, because you're not going to know anything, so you're going to start from scratch. But you'll see how all these little Googles will add up, and all these little finding what you needed to find to get to the next step, to get to the next commit. It'll add up, and eventually, like with my operating system project, I had something that blew people away, and people were asking, how did you do this? And because I'd gone through the process, to me, the question almost sounded silly because I'm telling you, I just made rectangles, and colored them. And I just kept doing that. And when I needed libraries, I learned how to pull them in. When I needed some logic, I figured out the logic of it. Oh, where do I store the state? Oh, it's not working the way I expect. I got an error. Let me Google the error. Let me dig into it. That's all it is. I've been doing this for almost more than 15 years if I'm talking about being as a kid, but professionally for a little less than 15. But I'm still Googling all the time for the most basic stuff, including the project that I just did recently, like less than a year and a half ago, less than a year ago, probably. And the reason I got the finish line thing here is because it's important to try to finish the project, or at least have something you can demo. And we'll get into demoing stuff in a bit and how you do that. But if you don't end up with anything to demonstrate or to show to anybody, it's very unfortunate because essentially no one really knew about it then. And if you have a bunch of code, no one's just going to look at a repo that they can't run or that's incomplete, typically. I mean, it's hard enough to get people, recruiters, and maybe not, I don't know how recruiters look at it, but in general, people that are hiring, I've had trouble getting them to look at my repo that has 1,000 plus GitHub stars. Even then, they still haven't seen it, after we get a few interviews in perhaps, and I mention it and they haven't looked at it, and I gave it to them at the start, and it's like, oh man, if that didn't even get looked at, how is somebody hoping that their thing's going to get looked at? But at the same time, I had some experience, so I think that just kind of shows that once you have experience, that they don't look at this as much. But I think when you don't have experience, or you have only a little experience, then it can be more important. And we'll talk about what experience is and how you can kind of tweak stuff to show off what real experience you have, and allow the people trying to hire you to ask the right questions. So let's move on to the next one. So yeah, if you're going to be doing a project, you're going to be doing any kind of coding of any kind, early on, you want to understand that you should break tasks up into small parts, the smallest parts possible. And I do this all the time and it's kind of what I was just saying about rectangle, coloring the rectangle, But the thing I was talking about there in my rectangle example, I didn't really clarify, was the taskbar, a Windows 10 taskbar replica that I essentially made that worked on a web page. And that's all it is. It's just a bunch of rectangles and icons. And when you click them, actions occur. And if you know how to write the code to do things with those actions and explain to the computer what you want to do, that's all it is, essentially. So you need to just break it up into those little pieces, and they all add up, like I'm telling you, especially with one type of programming that I like called functional programming. I find is very enjoyable for writing code that way, because you're writing these little functions, like let's say with a calculator, a function for adding, a function for subtracting, and you just very little separate concerns. But when you add them all up, you have a calculator, or when you add the calculator up, you have an operating system, let's say. I mean, it takes a while before you can extract to that level, but and typically you wouldn't write all of that stuff. And when I say operating system in quotes, it's because it's mostly just visual stuff, and I'm definitely not doing a crazy amount of things, but there is some things in the background going on, so it is somewhat advanced, but know your limits with what language you're using. Like you're not going to necessarily make an operating system in the browser, a real one. You're going to have to know your limits when you start a project like that, when you have a pie in the sky one, or maybe not, to be honest. I mean, I have intentions to go far with it, so maybe you should really shoot for the moon with your project, with your idea, because then you're going to be you should find a project that's going to get you doing the most amount of Googling, because the Googling is where you learn, essentially. So back to breaking up tasks. So you see here some stuff I got. GitHub's got a lot of cool things right now in project management. I'll show you. I got a link here I can show you guys about project management. This is some GitHub features. A lot of this is free, if not all of it. With GitHub is essentially you can make issues. So this is part of breaking something up. So let's say you want to make this Windows taskbar. You need the button, you need the icon, you need there's going to be entries here. There's going to be a clock. There's going to be what's the size of it, what's the color of it. You can make tasks for all of this, and you can just keep breaking it up. And it's a big part of once you work in a professional software development environment with Agile and Scrum, and that they're going to be talking about breaking up user stories. As a user, I want the thing to do this. I want the taskbar to be blue, that kind of thing. And those become tasks, and those become little coding assignments, and then you don't overwhelm yourself with complexity. And that's how you get this snowball effect where you do 1,000 little things, and then you have this huge thing. Another cool thing, this is the board I was talking about that they have. And if you go back to my slide here, I had a couple other ones. Trello is another tool that also has these kind of boards. They have different names for them. Kanban, I think, is a name for these kind of boards. Again, it's just a way of breaking up ideas into smaller parts, and then having a methodology for finishing them, for doing them. And you can do some labels and stuff here. This is GitHub issues, and you can see there's some labels and that kind of thing. This goes to focusing on one thing at a time. So once you break it into these small parts, you focus on that one task, and you're not jumping around. But first I was telling you not to jump around with languages. I'm also telling you once you're within the language, focus on the task at hand. You're going to find things you want to change. You're going to find things that aren't related, that are out of scope. You can make notes of those. You can make new tasks if you want, but you got to focus. And the more you focus and the more you narrow the task, the easier it's going to be for you to get into like a flow state type of thing, like get in the flow of coding. And when you're doing that, that's the kind of state that I get into a lot, actually, to be honest. And that's something that's been huge for me as a programmer, is like when I was a kid, I would be like, I want to do this specific thing. And once I would get into it, it would just be like, oh man, like 7 hours have gone past. I didn't even realize. And that's, I think, that flow state that people talk about. And I get into that all the time, honestly. I mean, I get interrupted with like all the different things that go on, meetings and work and that kind of such. But when I'm programming and I'm really into it, the time does fly for me. So that's something, if you don't feel that way, then maybe you're doing the wrong tasks. It doesn't mean programming is not for you, but you need to think about what you want to do and what's not interesting and why it's not working out, you know, and you got to keep iterating over yourself and your learning process. So yeah, let's move on to the next thing. I think I've beaten that one. Use the right tools. That's a big one. And like I was saying earlier, when I started out, I was just using Notepad and just downloading the documents. I didn't know about dev tools. I don't know if there was dev tools type stuff back then. There probably was back in the day with Firefox 1 or whatever it was I had. Netscape, I think I had. I don't even know if I knew about, I think I knew about View Source, but I don't know if there was like an inspect. But there is an inspect now, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So let's say I'm using Chrome, and if I right click on this page and I click inspect, this is something called developer tools within Chrome. There's something similar in Firefox and Safari, you know, all the different browsers, I believe, depending on which other ones there are, Edge, I guess. But this is huge. This is all the information you need to be a hardcore programmer, at least for the front end. All the network information going on, the stuff I was telling you guys about the REST protocol, GET, that kind of thing. The different files and where they go. This could be the directory structure, or this could be what's been packed, web packed in or bundled. This is like the HTML elements, like I was telling you, the CSS. Again, you got your JavaScript here, all these different tools you have, different tools for learning about how the web page functions, the security of it, like HTTPS, like I was telling you. So you see, you need to know these things too, because they're all very clearly right there. But yeah, that's just one example, and that's what I showed here. This is my dark mode dev tools. But here's another one, Visual Studio 2019 example, and behind it here, VS Code, Visual Studio Code. These are different coding editors, and this is leveling up from Notepad by far. There's another thing called Notepad++ actually that I used for a long time, which is level up from Notepad, but this is a level up, I would say, and this is essentially professional programming environments, and they're free to download too. So that's another cool thing. All these tools I've mentioned are free, so get them and start playing with them. And some of the advantages with tools like this is they have a lot of extensions built in, which is really cool. And these extensions will give you a lot of different things. Like, you see how the code's very colorful and stuff. That's obviously, you don't get that with Notepad. That's telling you the different syntaxes of what's going on. So when you see green, you know it's comments, and you know that's not functional code. You can ignore that. And it just allows you to have a better context. And instead of just looking at this white and black code and also same with other information. Like, there's an extension you can get called Git Lens that will show you who else has edited code in the past and essentially the history of all files, which can be extremely important when you're trying to figure out what's going on when you come into projects and stuff. And we'll talk more about that involving Git, what Git is, and that's another huge thing you guys need to know. But yeah, so you want to use the right tools. There's another one here, Postman. This is for doing that REST API type stuff I was telling you about. This is, again, another useful tool. This is a step up from even what the DevTools network tab gets you, in that the network tab has a lot of good information, but I feel with Postman, you can do a lot more editing to the requests you want to do and the data that you want to work with. So again, these are tools you need to learn. Again, just keep Googling. It's all on Google. Oh yeah, at the same time, this is actually the step I wanted to talk about, Git. So Git's, again, another thing you're going to need to learn. It's a method of how you're going to store the source code files, essentially. Source code repository. And GitHub is one of the main people that runs a Git repository, free Git repositories for everybody. So there's other ones though, GitLab, Bitbucket. I don't know if they do free Bitbucket, but there's several free ones out there. GitHub's the most popular. And Git in general, you're going to need to learn. Almost any company you work at, they're going to be using a code repository, hopefully. If they're not, you can be the smart guy that comes in and says, dude, why are you using FTP? Why are you using folders? You need to use Git, because, or they could use something else, TFS, Mercurial. There's several others, but some kind of source control system is huge, and it's a bare minimum, I would say, as a software developer. You need to know about that, because it's just critical. You just want to know that. Linters is another one is another tool that's going to help you out. Same with type systems and auto formatting, like prettier type things, that kind of thing. These are all different tools that are going to essentially adjust the code for you and give you almost like spell check notes about little problems you're doing or little suggestions. And that's another good thing about using proper IDE tools is when you type, let's say you type a variable and then a dot. Typically a dot is like an accessor. So something on that variable, I want to access a function on it or another aspect of it. And if you're just using Notepad, you press dot, you're not going to get anything. But on an IDE or a proper tool, it's going to suggest all the things that you can access on that variable that before the dot. And that's huge. You need that essentially. I don't know what I would do without that. I mean, you can memorize some stuff, but even for the littlest stuff, it's just good to have those auto suggestions. And there's so many extensions that can help you there, and even has some artificial intelligence to basically assess your code and know, oh, he probably is going to want this function next based on what he was doing up there and that kind of thing. So that stuff is definitely going to level you up, and you're going to want to use that. Other tooling you're going to need to know about: automation, like the CI, CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. That's something you're probably going to want to learn about at some point. It's also something you can do with GitHub, and they have GitHub Actions. It's essentially just a way to do things with your code after you've committed it. So once I commit the code, I want to run some tests I've written, or I want to check that the formatting is correct, or I want to make sure that it's building properly, or I want it to automatically go to some place and be hosted somewhere. These are all automation tasks that you're going to want to do. And automating tasks is a huge part of being a developer as well. And that's something you're going to want to get into. And also the command line. Be it Windows, be it Mac, be it Linux, whatever environment you end up using, you're going to eventually need to use some command line tools or some command arguments, to make a folder, let's say, or to do a git cloning or something like that. You can avoid it for a long time, perhaps forever, but I think you're going to want to know a little bit about the command line and just some basic functions. And it's essentially where I started, because when I started with computers, there was just like DOS. Windows, I guess it was just DOS. Just before Windows 3.1, I was playing with DOS, which is essentially just command line already. So I'd already gotten used to typing commands in to kind of talk to the computer. That's kind of old school at this point, but if you're a programmer, it's still pretty common, and you're going to use it tons for doing basic stuff like installing packages and stuff. So yeah, we've talked about 7. Let's go on to 8 here. Write lots of code. Practice. I don't have a lot of other cool information for this, so I just thought I'd have a cat hitting the keyboard GIF, because cats are cool, popular. I'm actually allergic to cats, unfortunately, but I see the appeal. So, but yeah, some ideas for writing lots of code. So let's say we're talking about this project that you guys are going to start to write. You can do a technique called pseudocode, or you can write like empty functions, let's say, to essentially start writing the basic idea of what you want. So let's say, go back to this taskbar example, and let's say we're doing some logic stuff. We're writing what happens when you click the start button. What do you want it to do? So some code you could write before you even know where to do anything. Let's just say you could put on click. Let's do it. I don't have a code to show you, but yeah, I'll explain pseudocode to you. So pseudocode is essentially just saying, in just plain English, how you'd like it to go. So let's say on click, I want the button to open. And then you could turn button open into a function. And you could turn on click into a function, like the syntax for it. You could write it out even before the functions exist. And eventually you start to mock up this skeleton of an app where nothing really works, but you've kind of got the basic empty functions. And that's easy enough to do, because you're essentially just you're naming the functions what you want to happen before you've figured out what will happen. And that process alone can kind of get you started. And then you start looking at the easy ones and you pick those apart, and then you get to the harder ones, and that can kind of help you divvy up the code, like I was saying, and break it up into pieces. And if you get stuck, you can try different approaches, move on to different pieces of the code. That's another thing that can get discouraging if you just stay stuck on a certain thing. You have to have a way to have the project where you can move on to other things. At a certain point, you might get stuck on something, and at that point, we're gonna talk about getting the community involved. If you just completely can't find it on Google and you just need help, there's always somebody there to help somewhere. You're gonna find them, but but also you should try to move on to other things, because sometimes moving on to something else can give you an aha moment for that other thing. It just works. It just happens, This is a good one too, in regards to just practicing, and then like in reference to my project where I'm copying Windows 10 visuals. It is the idea of copying stuff. And that can be where tutorials can be helpful, but they're going to try to tell you they're going to just lay it all out for you a little too well. Take the photo of of the end product and try to visually copy that, because trying to copy that and trying to do a very good copy is going to get you into the detail work. And when your box doesn't look the same size as their box, you're going to have to go and figure out how to adjust that little bit, how to move the borders the way you want, how to get the padding the way you want. That's the detail work that's going to get you learning, and not just making it your way or making a one-off or just copying exactly what they've already given you. And here's another one that can be useful too if you have a job already, or you want to do some different stuff at home, is find opportunities to code. And that's a lot of what I did at the start of my career when I wasn't really in coding and I was more in IT, is I would find use cases like this use case could be at any company, was that the company wanted to make a website. I mean, in this case, it was for a computer store, but any company might want to make a website, and they were asking the accountant to do it, because she maybe knew a bit of PHP. And that was one of my first jobs I'd started, and I was just fixing computers, and I kind of overheard it, and I tried to take that opportunity. Hey, I'll help with the code. I can help, do you need help? And there's opportunities like that in a lot of companies. And that's how you get your foot in the door. And that's kind of the kind of stuff you can put on your resume and put on LinkedIn to say that you've done stuff professionally, because it's true, if you get in those scenarios. So those are my notes on that. And then as far as writing lots of code, another goal is to write clean code. That is going to show that you have some professionalism, and it's going to make a huge difference in readability and just accelerating your learning, because you're going to be writing better code. It's just going to work better. If you follow some of these principles, you're going to get better code in the end. And you want to follow them early on, honestly. Getting into a couple of them, dry is do not repeat yourself. You don't want to go overboard with this, but I see often with people just starting out with code is where they're going to copy the same essential concept over and over again. And you see these patterns in the code when you're looking at their code. And essentially what you want to do is you want to extract those out to make them into abstractions. That's a huge part of programming, is abstracting out ideas, Print A, print B, print C, print D. Well, maybe you want to print the alphabet, Abstract out the idea, and then instead of 26 functions, you write one function with a bit more code perhaps, but it's so much more clear. And in the end, it's less code with that one function, but you know what I mean? Let's say it's 10 lines versus 100 lines, perhaps. Those abstractions can be really fun to find, and they're hugely important. And like I say, they're going to really excel your learning. Another one, the KISS concept. I think this is in everything. Keep it simple, stupid, I think it is. And that's a huge part of programming in general. And it's what I try to attain, is how can we make this simpler? How can we make this more clear? Why do I have a comment here? Why did I need to explain something? Why wasn't the function name, why wasn't the variable name enough? How can I make this less lines, without hurting the syntax kind of thing? How can I just clean this up more? How can I abstract it more? How can I extract out a function in a reasonable way that's not arbitrary, Those are fun opportunities, and that's kind of a big part of clean code. And that's also this book here I've shown you here, Clean Code. There's a lot of other concepts behind it. Another one here, descriptive variables. That's kind of what I was talking about with the naming your things properly, and so you don't need comments. You want to, after you write code, you want to double check, you want to refactor. Refactor is just like changing your code. But before you commit something for others to see, I mean, at least my habit is always to be like, what have I written here? What have I done? I need to look at this. And almost always, and you'll see in my streams, I'll change my mind on a few things, or it's like, oh, I changed this file, I should have changed that file as well. And it shows, it's almost sloppy if you're not doing that, I feel. So that's just good work ethic, I feel, in that way. And another idea with clean code is leaving the code better than you found it, essentially. So a lot of times in companies, you're going to be working with existing code bases. So you're going to be coming into some messy code, essentially, some dirty code. And you don't want to make it worse. You don't want to copy bad practices. So when you come in there, follow the practices you learn, the good practices, and don't be looking at their code and thinking, I need to write it this way. You can be the champion of saying, why aren't we doing it this way? And moving forward, we should do it this way. and see how far that gets you. If you get pushback, I mean, that's something at every company, but I think that's a good stance to have in general. So why not start from there? And yeah, another thing in talking about code and existing code bases is work with other developers' code. Read it, write it. This is going to be a huge learning experience. And you see some of the images I put here: GitHub's Google, GitHub, Facebook. This is some React source code here for how useState works. You can just see some examples here of how you can look at any code you want, essentially. So many things are on GitHub that are open source that if you want to know, well, how is React doing that? You can look at the source code. It's not a secret. And you're going to look at very good best practices in most cases, because Facebook employees, Google employees are the ones that have written these things. So those are some really good examples. And there's a ton of other ones. There's so much on GitHub. And that's another thing of me steering people away from tutorials, because those aren't always the best examples, and those aren't the people working at the Googles and the Facebooks that are having to go all through all these stringent processes and best practices and PRs. So you're gonna PRs being pull requests where other coders review the code. So when you get that stringent process, you're getting much tighter, cleaner code, and using that code to get a solid base, I think is ideal. And yeah, just play around with the code. Like with GitHub, you can check out these branches, copy the code to your own computer, build them. They usually have instructions on how to build it, and you can run it. You can run a lot of these things, and you can just start changing things and seeing, oh, okay, if I change that line, this happens. And that's just a huge way to understand things. Let's move on here. So yeah, what I was talking about before about communities, this is going to be important too. So you're going to get stuck. You're going to want to ask questions. And that's where you're going to want to have a community. A big important part of having a community when you want to talk about stuff is having quick responses, because you don't want to send I have a forum post that I've been waiting a month for. That's not an efficient way to learn. You want an answer ideally today. That's why a lot of these ones I write, Discord, this one's Gitter, I believe it's called, Reddit, Stack Overflow. They also have chat, Stack Overflow, I believe. Those are some pretty immediate ones where if you post something, you're going to get some comments, you're going to get messages right away. Some of these are chat. Some of these are very active forums. Part of the community is going, and again, this is community as well. Stack Overflow, Reddit, Meetup, they have communities as well. A lot of communities. I have a Discord channel. I'll post it in the description, and you guys can chat with me on there. There's always communities around all these things. Free Code Camp, another huge community, big YouTube channel. Dev.to, web.dev. These are some communities. They're less so about posting questions, but there's just a lot of information about what's going on in the coding community, cool little things going on, and that's another way to get into the community and to kind of understand the lingo and get a feel for what's going on. And these can also be good opportunities to find a mentor if you can, or find several. It can be hard to find mentors, and sometimes people don't want to help necessarily, or they have their own things. I mean, everybody's busy. But if you can get somebody that can consistently help you, or somebody that you feel you can ask questions to, that can be pretty important. And make sure to phrase it with some good questions. Don't waste their time. But that's going to be valuable to be able to have someone like that. And getting someone like that, you're going to want to be able to get good at communicating if you're going to be working with a person like that. And that's where you're going to want to find examples from people who you think are good communicators. And you see some examples here I posted some interesting ones. This is personal to me, but something I strive for. I don't know if people necessarily want to strive for this. Is I've always liked the communication style of someone like a Data, like from Star Trek, TNG, The Next Generation. He's an android, but you always understand what he's saying. He's very clear, very professional. Emotionless. So there's that. But you can put emotion in it. But if you strive for this, your emotion's going to slip in anyways. But if you strive for that almost perfectionism in speak and perfectionism in communication of an android, I think that's a good place to aim for, honestly. And these people here aren't necessarily examples of this, but here's an example of where you can watch people talking about topics quite similar to software development, that kind of thing. And you can get some learning examples there. Lex Friedman, this is one. There's many, but podcasts is my example, what I'm mentioning here, is that, and Lex Friedman specifically, because he's interviewed 2-3 hour long interviews with the inventor of C, let's say, the inventor of Python, the person who's the inventor of Stack Overflow, and just tons of titans in programming and stuff. And they're not necessarily the best communicators, to be honest, but hearing how they communicate and how they talk about code and how they talk about programming, that is an interesting insight, and you can learn a lot from that, and that can kind of shape how you see how they see it, and also to see, oh, this could be my future, because this is the cream of the crop of how far do you want to go as a programmer? Do you want to invent a programming language? Do you want to have a super successful website? You want to run a massive company? I mean, he's interviewed Elon Musk as well, and who was part of PayPal. So I mean, he's a developer as well. People don't remember as much anymore, but. So those are some of my role models. Geordie LaForge is another communicator. I've got him, the engineer here. He's another Star Trek character. But again, I mean, he's an engineer, and he's just a great communicator, honestly. And you can look at top comments in GitHub and Stack Overflow. Comments where people have given them like thousands of stars and that kind of thing. Those are comments that people find valuable. How did those people communicate their ideas? Emulate that. Again, learning the terminology in that way. And then, so that's for communicating. And then another important one, and to stick on the data and Geordie theme, you got to get good at debugging and problem solving. That's huge. That's where I started. That's where I was before I had programming, just fixing computers, was how do I fix this computer? Start at the start, It's not turning on, well, okay, is the power okay? Is the hard drive okay that loads the data? Is the processor okay that does the thinking, That's how it is for programming, Oh, this doesn't load. Okay, well, does the page itself load? Okay, well, does that component load? Is the CSS issue, That's the kind of thing that you need to get into with programming and debugging. And the reason I use this photo with Data and Geordie again is I kind of think of it as like a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing, a detective, a murder mystery for the problem at hand. And that's a fun way that you can think about it, and here's the hourglass here. That's a Sherlock Holmes thing as well. Just when I search for problems for debugging, and an important part of that, if you see here an error log here, is something I wanted to iterate on, is read the errors carefully, double check the errors, because that happens a lot where the error actually is saying what the problem is, but you either misinterpreted it or thought that the error wasn't useful. And that could probably saved me like 30% of the time, is just properly reading the error. Other things for debugging is breakpoints. That's something you want to learn about depending on what kind of debugging system you have. I mean, honestly, no matter what code you have, almost, there's always breakpoints. So learn about those. They're essentially a way to say, when the code gets to this line, I want it to stop. And then at that point, you have an opportunity to inspect kind of the environment of variables and what's going on. And you could step through it at that point. And that's critical for kind of figuring things out. And you can do that with front end as well. You can just add a function called debugger anywhere in your code, and Chrome will stop at that. So there's a nice tip there for front end stuff. And you need to learn how to trace problems, kind of like I was saying with the computers. You need to start from both ends, why doesn't it work on the display end? Why doesn't it work on the logical end? And try to trace back the problem from both directions, perhaps. And having a working and a non-working state to compare can be very helpful in those situations. I wanted to do this, but it's doing that. Well, okay, well, when it works, it does this, this, and this. Okay, when it doesn't work, it does this and this, but then this part it doesn't do. So I got to dig in there, that kind of thing. I mean, it's actually, you could say it's common sense, but I don't know if it is. And I think it takes time, and it's a skill, so you have to learn it. So it's definitely something that's important to think about. And then another one, this one's getting close to the end here, talking about getting hired and stuff, is you're going to want to make a GitHub profile. I mean, you're going to want to have GitHub for, like what I was saying, for having Git and for having for all the things that Git can give you. But you want to have a GitHub profile too, because it's something you can show your employers, your potential employer, especially when you don't have any experience at the start. Like I say, if you have a lot of experience, they might not look at it, but it can be helpful to have, and to have this kind of activity here can be nice. And that's why I would suggest anytime you are working on any projects or any of the coding we're talking about, is you make a repository for it, and you just keep sending your code there, and you commit it and you send it out. Because then it's going to show that you're being active, and also your code's going to be out there. That's more stuff that people can look at. They can see your learning, they can see your mistakes, but they can see your learning. If you just keep all the code on your computer, no one really knows you're doing it. So that's just a little thing you get there. And if you see here at the back, this is that operating system I was talking to you about with the taskbar and everything. This is just to show you that, again, talking about demos, you need to have something you can demonstrate. You need to have websites people can go to see the things you've done that in action, and that's something with GitHub. When you have repos, you can do that, because they have something called GitHub Pages, where they'll host it for you, and they'll even give you a URL. And if you want to play around with DNS and learn how to do domain names, you can give your own custom URL. In my case, x.dustinbrett.com is that website that I'm showing you there. But that's a custom URL that I've done through having that domain and my understanding of DNS, plus it being hosted on GitHub pages. I could have hosted it myself elsewhere, but that's just a great thing GitHub gives you for free. So yeah, you want to fill out your repo, do your profile, put all the information in. In general, when you do profiles, you should fill out your information, I feel. And yeah, that brings us to our last thing about getting a job is you got to hustle your way into the industry. And why I say hustle is you got to be a go-getter. I mean, if you're going to be a self-taught person and you're going to come in and you don't have that degree, you don't have something that someone else has worked 3+ years for, let's say, you need to have something come in and you need to show off what you have. You need to be able to say, I have confidence in this. I know I can do this. You need to lay it on the line, kind of thing. You can't rest on your laurels or whatever the term is, because you don't have any. All you have is your knowledge, and you have to show that to them. And yeah, on that note, you want to set up your LinkedIn as well. You see, I got my LinkedIn. It's not perfect, but you want to put the information in there, and you want to update your other jobs as well, where if you found opportunities to do coding and that kind of thing, put that in there. Put that you've done that. Or even if you didn't find too many opportunities, just find something to put in there. You can even, if you've made your own website business, you made websites for friends. I put that in there for the longest time, that I had a website making company that I made websites for my dad. I mean, how professional is that? Hard to say, but it's experience for sure. And if you wanted to make a website for you, I could do it. And I think that having that on the LinkedIn, it's obvious that that's the case. And people use LinkedIn. It's super popular right now. So for that reason alone, you should be on it if you're interested in job hunting. And yeah. So you should accept that you're going to have to prove yourself. And if you see here, I've got the FANG and then block through it. If you remember the FANG, the Facebook, the Apple, the Amazon, Netflix, Google, all those different companies. I'm not saying you shouldn't try for those, but you shouldn't expect to get hired at those, because they will hire people that don't have degrees, but typically you're going to have some experience, or you're going to have to really be able to show off some skills, or you're going to have a degree in something else that kind of shows you, this guy's worked hard already. He's put in some time. He knows how to learn. And I see that he's been applying it to computer science as well. But it can be hard, honestly, to get into those. I haven't been into those. I haven't even attempted it in some ways. I'm not sure if I have the work ethic to work in a lot of those companies, to be honest, because they can be tough, I mean, it's a different level of people, a different level of coding in some ways. And not everybody that works there is like that, but that's the pinnacle essentially in this field in some ways, other than being self-employed. So it's something everybody talks about all the time, but I wouldn't necessarily focus on that. There's thousands, millions of other jobs. All my other jobs have been non-FANGs, and they're all perfectly legitimate software companies, or companies that needed software things that I was able to help out with. So yeah, you want to apply to these jobs. Obviously, apply to any opportunity you feel a fit in. There's going to be tons of jobs that talk about needing a bachelor degree. Don't necessarily worry about that, honestly. But I mean, be realistic. If they're saying bachelor's plus 3 to 5 years, maybe that is a bit much. I mean, hey, if you feel everything else about the job description you can do and you've learned, perhaps you should apply. And it's on them to prove that you aren't eligible, if that you can't do it, if they can't befuddle you, if you're able to do it, there you go. And as far as applying to LinkedIn is a great option. Indeed, Monster, Craigslist, there's tons of good options. Another one, and a thing I noted here, HackerX, that's just one example of one of these kind of, what do they call it? Networking and recruiting events, they call it. It's an interesting opportunity. I've actually found some opportunities through those. It can be like a speed dating as a bunch of developers talking to employers, that kind of thing. They're doing it virtual now, of course, because of what's going on right now, the COVID situation. But those can be a good opportunity. When the COVID situation wasn't there, it was also a free food opportunity, so free pizza, And you see this other picture here, putting the foot in the door. You got to find a way to get your foot in the door. My first job, I just got off through a Craigslist hustle, I would call it. Turned an IT job into a programming job, essentially. And it's kind of gone from there. And as a self-taught person going into a professional industry, you need to have that attitude and you need to figure that kind of stuff out. And then, yeah, as far as during the interview, you want to focus on what you know and focus on what you've accomplished so far. And if you're going to come into the interview and you haven't accomplished anything, you don't know very much, then you shouldn't expect to get the job, honestly. So you're going to have some of that stuff that you can talk about. And if you don't have that, I'm not sure I can help you there. You know, it's probably too soon for you to be interviewing for jobs if that's the scenario. But you have to be honest too about what you don't know as well, because it's going to come up most likely. There's going to be things they talk about that you don't know. It's happened in every interview I've ever been in. But that's when you have to talk about kind of the things that we've talked about today, and about, well, I don't know that, but here are the steps that I would do to find it out. You know, I would Google this specific thing, or I would look at this documentation, or you know, here's how I would approach the problem. And that's when how it gets into the algorithm stuff, is you start walking through it, because all the algorithms are is just a bunch of rules and how to solve the problem, essentially. So it's a problem solving task to find the algorithm, essentially. And that's a way to think of it. And if you talk through how you're doing it and everything, the employer respects that. And you might not get the job, but I think they'll understand that, hey, he's learning and he knows something, you know, instead of just umming and ahhing your way through it, or really just completely fumbling it. I actually prefer that approach to even learning the algorithms. I don't even do the algorithm stuff, and I'll go in blind and I'll know they're going to ask me algorithm stuff. And it's like, I'm going to do my best and see what happens. And luckily the algorithms have been, the tasks have been easy enough where I feel I have accomplished them, but there's been bumps, and the questions always feel so arbitrary to me, and I've never really dealt with them myself in my professional career so far. But there's something you're going to run into in interviews. So you have to have a philosophy for that, either studying or like I'm talking about, just kind of walk through it. But yeah, that's 15 things. So that's it, guys. Thank you for watching. I'll be doing a deeper dive into some of these. If you guys want, please leave comments. If you have specific things you want to talk more about. If you want more info on any of this stuff we discussed too, leave comments in the video, and I'll comment on that if I don't make a video about it. But I probably will make a video. We'll see. If you like this video, please leave a like, please. And if you want more content like this, or you want to see more stuff like this, please subscribe to my channel. So thanks again, and see you in the next video.